Hello, welcome back to Central Line. It's so great to have everyone with us today for this very special episode that I'm super excited to do. We are here with two guests today. So we have Charles Hurdy, a wonderful veterinarian who reached out through the podcast email address. So someone does check that email address, and it's me. So if anybody wants to reach out, please do, because I am so glad that Charles reached out and wanted to tell his team's story. And one of his team members is joining us today too. We have Alana McKern, who is, by Charles's definition, a badass unicorn who works in the same practice. So, Charles and Alana, Badass Unicorn, it is wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much for having us, Katie.
So before we get
Thank you.
started, as usual, we're going to get into a lot of great stuff today, but I'd love to have you tell our listeners just a little bit about the both of you. So, Charles, would you mind giving us a little bio and who you are, how you came to be here?
Yeah, sure. And just again, I want to make sure that we thank you for what you're doing with the podcast. Like the content of this program is awesome,
Thank you.
which definitely compelled me to reach out to you.
I'm so glad.
And I'm just so happy that you were receptive to our story, and we're happy to tell it and share it.
I think I can honestly say your story made my day and probably week and everybody else's that I shared with at AHA, which is a lot of people.
Awesome.
Definitely the appreciation is mutual.
Well, thanks. But yeah, Charles Hurdy. I'm a veterinarian. I've been in practice, it's hard to even believe it, but 20 years. I traditionally am from the East Coast. I did my veterinary studies at NC State, at the vet school there. Did an internship at the University of Georgia. Worked in Maryland for a little bit in small animal practice, and then moved out to the West Coast. My wife is also a veterinarian, and we actually bought the practice 15 years and 2 days ago. I always like to say my son was actually born on the day that we bought the practice. We actually
Wow.
we faxed the paperwork on the sale from the maternity ward at the hospital. So that's kind of how we gauge that. But yeah, we came out here to the Oregon coast, so that's where our practice is, and we're about a 21 person practice, 4 or 5 veterinarians at any given time, just to kind of give an idea of the size of our practice. But yeah, small animal practice, AHA, and it's been a great journey this 20 years in veterinary medicine. And if you ever told me even a couple of years ago that I might be on this podcast talking about our practice, I wouldn't believe you.
I mean, same, so.
Yeah. Did want to say too that we have partnered with another veterinary group, Western Veterinary Partners, just a couple months ago, and I find myself on their veterinary medical advisory board. So that's been another interesting journey for me. But I guess that's kind of my quick story there, quick bio.
Yeah, that's a lot of years compressed into a few sentences there, but
Yeah.
That's cool. Happy practice anniversary.
Yeah, right. Thanks.
And you're clearly one of those people who doesn't do anything halfway, buy a practice and have a kid on the exact same day. That's pretty hardcore.
It was definitely hardcore. When we found out all those things were happening, I looked at Natasha, my wife, and I'm like, hey, if we survive the next couple of years, we can do anything. And here we are.
That's awesome. And Alana, what about you?
Well, I guess so. I'm Scottish. I grew up in Singapore and Hong Kong with my parents, and I moved over here 13 years ago, about maybe 15 actually. But moved over here to help my sister-in-law, and all I'd been doing was customer service for 24 years, pretty much. And I actually ended up getting bit by a dog, and I wanted to work at a vet clinic because she was working for Grove at the time, and she pushed me, told me I couldn't, probably because, and I totally agreed with her because I was terrified. Well, 9 years later, I'm the operations manager at Grove, and I am FIFRI certified, and I work with dogs. So yeah, no, Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and I just love it. I just have always wanted to retire at Grove. I love everybody there, and
That's
we're just a big
fantastic.
family, and
That's a
that's
good
pretty much where I'm
origin
going to be
story, right? You don't
at
hear
Grove.
that too
Yeah.
often. So,
Yeah,
um,
and I would add that Alana is a lot of the glue that keeps the team together as well. She may not necessarily realize that, but I'll publicly embarrass you a little bit. But part of the well-being and mental health program and the different things that we're trying to do, she's fully behind. And honestly, I don't think we'd be able to do some of the things that we're doing without her like dedication. So thank you, Alana.
that's wonderful. I love to hear that. And
Thank you.
there's
I
so many
appreciate it.
practices out there where, there are a couple of team members that really do make it all work. It's always a team effort, and there's so many pieces that have to go right for things to work well. But for people like you, Alana, I think it's really important that you get recognized for that work, because I think there's somebody at every practice who really does take on that role, whether they know it or not, and it's really vital. So
Yeah.
that's great.
Thank you.
And Alana's also wearing a really awesome hat, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But before we start, I always like to know a little bit more about our guests. And so the question that I wanted to ask you, the personal question I wanted to ask you guys today is, if you could put up a billboard or a tweet that everybody in veterinary medicine would see, what would it say?
Yeah, I got this question. I've heard this on your program before
Hmm.
and kind of saw it in the pre-program notes. And I thought about some of the things that we live by in the practice. And it's like, well, those are going to come up
Hmm.
during the program. So I thought of something that I've actually championed and really promoted. And it's actually a quote by Margaret Mead. And I think it's an important one for everybody to realize. And I'm just going to read it because I don't want to mess it up. But basically, what she says is, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And, it's such a great quote, because if you have an idea, if you're contemplating and you feel like maybe you can't get that out there or do it, but you just have to start, and it can be one person, it can be a small practice, it can be a couple people, and as long as you're intentional and thoughtful, and you're moving forward with whatever your passion might be, or this idea or this concept, it all starts small. All big ideas start small. Maybe that should be the billboard, but but that's kind of, our program started very locally, very small, and it's gained some momentum and it's changed some lives. So that would probably be my billboard quote,
I
because that's
love
something that I
that.
have, up on my wall. So
I love that. And you're so right. I think a lot of people feel like a lot of the world is run by really big corporations or big groups now, and they feel like they're not going to make a difference anymore. And I
hmm
think that there couldn't be anything farther from the truth, because what big groups can do, and people with a microphone can do, and people who can reach more than that small group can do, is amplify
hmm
the things that those small groups are doing. And that's what I would love to do with the podcast, with AHA. That's what you're doing by partnering with Western Veterinary Partners and trying to bring change to more practices. And even if you don't change the whole world right away,
right,
you
right,
could be changing somebody's world at any given
exactly.
time. And that's a fantastic one. So love it. Alana, how about you?
I guess mine would kind of be short and sweet. I guess
Oh, I love
wellness.
that. It
You
is short and
deserve it.
sweet and to the point, but it is a huge
Everyone
message,
deserves it.
right?
Definitely.
Yeah, and something that I think everybody in this profession needs to be reminded of on a regular basis. So I love that one. We need to put that billboard on everyone's drive to work. That'd be great. Okay, good. Well, let's get into it. The reason you're here is that Charles sent this email, and the words grit and love were in it. And you had a document attached to it where you told your team's story and what you had been doing. And that grit and love phrase just captured my attention right away, because there couldn't be anything that described our profession more accurately than those
Right.
two words together. I mean, I haven't met a single veterinary professional who wasn't gritty and who wasn't absolutely full of love for the animals that they're taking care of. So I thought that was just, maybe you should write marketing copy because it's really good. So I'd love to just have you start by telling us about it. Charles, can you tell us tell us the origin story of this program and what it is?
Yeah, sure. And yeah, thanks for the feedback on Grit Plus Love. And it was one of those concepts that, I mean, we were very intentional in the development of our culture. But I truly feel like we, just kind of like those words just sort of almost appeared before us, and it was just really exciting to be part of it. And I guess in terms of the origin story, I would kind of rewind all the way back to the beginning of COVID. I'm not going to relive all of that craziness, and we're still going through it, right? I mean, it's still happening. But when I think back on the beginning of COVID, and I think about the people that I was surrounded by, I just consider myself like so lucky, because I had a team that was open and ready and willing, and here we are. And one of the things that we did when COVID hit, with all that fear and all that isolation, we doubled down on the development of community. We really built on the concept of togetherness, and connection. And I really think that those are some of the things that we kind of lucked into that. I'm like, I kind of try to think back, like, how did that happen? Why did we do that? It really felt like the right thing to do, and that's what we did. And we recognized people for coming into work. We recognized people for all the great things they were doing. We recognized everybody for their perseverance, their resilience, pushing through all of these hard times and hard challenges. And that's sort of where the grit comes in, right? And the grit word landed in the treatment area, because in September of 2020, in the midst of the height of COVID, our community was faced with wildfires. I mean, literally the skies turned bright orange. There was ash and soot falling from the sky. There were houses burning in the northern part of our county, and then further on in our state, we were just having towns completely devastated. But this in our community was a completely new thing, and we were doing curbside care, and we were wearing our KN95 masks, not only for COVID, but because we were breathing in this ash that was like literally falling from the sky. And people came to work, and we delivered the great care that our clients were used to. I couldn't believe that people actually came to the clinic, but they did, and it was more of like emergency work. But I remember, kind of working on a team briefing and pulling people into the treatment area. And I was just like, you guys are the grittiest people like I have ever met. Like, you're amazing. And that's where it all kind of, the terminology came, this grit plus love. And one of the concepts with love, and the way that what that word means for us, is our empathy and our compassion, and obviously our love. We're grounded in that. But we took the empathy and the compassion a couple steps further. I think we all sort of think about the veterinary profession and the people within it being the most empathic people on the planet. And yes, we are. We apply that empathy, though, pretty exclusively to patients and clients. And we kind of don't have the boundaries, and so when that empathy is applied that way, I always like to say that empathy without boundaries is really self-destructive. I mean, you're not taking care of yourself. And so we turned that concept into let's apply empathy to each other, and also turn it back on ourselves. Well, compassion and some, take care of yourself before we, can take care of everything else, right? And so that's our grit plus love. And then what this kind of evolved into, and I know we're going to talk about this even more today, is we rallied around this concept for as long as we possibly could. But we all experienced it, right? The racial inequalities, the the riots that were happening, the COVID, the politics, everything just kind of isolating us, pulling us into these corners. And you could see that happening. I could see that happening with the team, and we were all feeling, the fear, the uncertainty, the doubt. And, I'm showing up to work and I'm like, oh my gosh, how are we going to steer this thing? Like, how am I showing up? and how can I ask everybody else to show up? I mean, this is like literally crazy. We're fear, we're flight, we're freeze, we're in all these constant, like the amygdala is just like in constant, and nobody's thinking anymore. And so we kind of framed this in the concept of trauma. Like, we're really experiencing a daily situation that is really hard to recover from. And we built this culture that, we leaned on, but I think it's the culture that allowed us to take the next steps. And so the next steps were reaching out to a local social worker, a practitioner of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and we brought a therapist into the mix. And we did quite an extensive program, 8.5 hours of training over 4 different sessions. And we've continued to have our social worker help us in the practice. Her name is Helen Beeman. She's amazing.
She is.
Yeah, I know you've met her. But what she did for us in the beginning, and I think the most powerful part of it, was the validation of what we were experiencing and an understanding of what we were experiencing, the emotions, the feelings, our experiences. We were all collectively having this, and we were all able to understand, explain, and just have the vocabulary to understand trauma, stress, anxiety, depression. We even talked about suicide. And she gave us some tools to understand that. And then we took it to the next level, where we then kind of learned some of the cognitive behavioral therapy techniques on everything from meditation to visualization to grounding ourselves in the present. And that was something that I feel was just lacking. That was the little push we needed to get healthier and to learn how to process what was happening to us. It's a hard job and we're all hard workers, and we take a lot of it home, and we live it, right? I mean, you hear about veterinary medicine and veterinary care. It's a calling. It's not a profession. But when it's a calling like that, sometimes we absorb it so teaply in everything we do, whether it be euthanasias or dealing with angry clients or dealing with team members that are having a problem. When we take all of that on so deeply, it's hard to process it, understand it, and I think we can do it for a period of time until something like COVID applies so much weight to our situation that really kind of shows our weaknesses, really reveals where we need help. And I looked at Helen after the 3rd session of going through this, and I'm like, Helen, we're doing something special. Like, this is, well, it was special for me. And I mean, it was changing my life. It was helping me be, a happier, better, more grounded person and understanding what I was going through. And I did see that in my team members too. I mean, there were multiple times where there were tears, but there was a lot of fun in this as well. And we came together. It just was part of our journey. I'm just so happy it has been part of our journey.
Yeah, that's incredible. I just think about all the things that lined up there to make it work. Like, you found Helen, and she turned out to be so wonderful. But also that first step, like, you came in and you said, how can we survive this together? Like, how can we do more than just make it through these days? How can we take care of ourselves and each other so that we're doing our best to thrive as well as survive? And that is such a central question. And so often I feel like veterinary professionals get stuck in the weeds of, okay, we have to get from today to tomorrow, and then we have to get from the first appointment to the second appointment, and there's no time to focus on those things, but those things are what are going to change that daily experience in the long run and make everyone's lives just so much better. And I'm so impressed and grateful that you, like, on your team's behalf, that you had that moment where you said to yourself, like, something's got to give. We have to do something differently.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It was, I knew I was at that point, and if I'm at that point and I'm reading the room right.
Yeah.
I mean, there were, and there probably were a couple episodes where, like a complete dysfunctional situation happened, and I'm like, I've never seen that before, like this angry client. I mean, and granted, the clients were also experiencing intense craziness. I mean, we're all experiencing this together.
Yeah.
But when you see sort of those equal levels of stress and dysfunction and processing and emotion, there was a couple episodes where I'm like, I can't ask people to endure this for much longer without something.
Yeah.
And the other part of it too, that I think helped us, is we did ask, we leaned into the team for, how are we going to do this, guys? Like, we came up with a lot of ideas, but I remember, Alana, you can probably remember this day too. It's like, there is no playbook, people. Like, what do we need to do to make your experience at work better? What can we do to make the experience better for our patients and our clients who are sitting out in their cars? And we got a bunch of ideas, and I think we acted on all of those ideas. And I think that's also maybe a message is, a lot of times we hover in contemplation, and like with Margaret Mead, right? I mean, we have the idea, but we let it sit in our brains. And as long as it's sitting in the brain, it's not out there doing. And, moving from contemplation and getting into the action part, the action steps, and hopefully we can talk a little bit about those action steps. But that was another thing that we did, and I think that was part of delivering that message of grit plus love and connection, was like, let's connect ourselves to this experience and let's all take ownership. And we had these colorful signs with cartoons. We had chalkboards that we had Amy, one of our receptionists, she did the artwork on it. We added more phones. We put signage up in the clinic. We tried to make it as best as we could, but It was a collaborative effort. And I think it's that ability to accept collaboration as well, because, and I'll just say from, practice managers and veterinarians in general like to try to control everything. And that's just not compatible with sanity anymore, right? We can't control anything.
Right. If we didn't learn anything else from 2020, we learned that, right?
Yeah, right. And so, being able to collaborate and distribute those ideas and then act on them, I think is also a critical message.
Yeah. Alana, as a team member, you're in a leadership role in the practice, but it is very common, I think, for us to hear about wellness programs and, initiatives taken by a company or a practice owner. And we hear about, oh, this worked great, or, look at this wonderful thing we're offering our team, but you don't always hear from the team and about how it worked for them and whether they agree that things really did go well or that it really was useful. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted Charles to bring one of the team, to talk, because that a program's no good if the person who runs it is the only person who thinks it worked great,
Right.
And
Right.
I feel like that oftentimes we can't always tell the difference. So, so I'm curious to hear from you, like, first of all, do you feel like the program was extremely helpful for your team, and that you have learned a lot about yourself and about how to sort of manage these difficult circumstances through it?
absolutely worth it for every single last one of us. I mean, who's lucky enough to
Yeah.
have a boss that comes on in and says, "Hey guys, just, we're all suffering here. I'm gonna make this better for you," and actually care enough to do
Food
this.
is
I mean, we had
important.
great
Yeah.
meals at the, when we went.
Yeah.
I mean, he enticed us in with food. I mean, that's, we're all hungry all the time, right? And then this great message that we got, and it was, obviously voluntary, but everybody wanted to be there, and everybody benefited from it. And like, honest to God, Charles is a great boss, and really empathetic, and just is there for the team. And yeah, no, we couldn't have done it without him for sure, being at the helm for sure. But no, the best thing that ever happened. I mean, it's just, we use the language every day. When we see somebody getting upset, we just throw it out there. And
Yeah.
before, I
Like,
guess
I
we
am
used to say, oh, just breathe. That didn't mean anything. It does now. When we say triangle, triangle breathing, square breathing, and it brings us back to all these things that we were taught by Helen, and what actually was put into our laps by Charles. So yeah, no, it's 100%.
Charles,
Would
Alana will be
wouldn't change a
expecting her
thing.
raise at
Would
the
definitely
end
do
of
it all over again if I could. Yeah.
But I love hearing that, and I love how you said that like it's not that nobody ever said, "Hey, just take a breath," before. It's that now it has a whole new meaning. And so instead of saying, "This person's flipping her lid," like, "This person is so reactive, this person can't handle stress," it's, we all have these moments, and here's what we can do to help each other manage those moments, because it's about the moment and it doesn't define who you are as a person. And I feel like I've come into contact with a lot of people who, I didn't always deal very well with the stress of practice, and especially when unpredictable things came, the wrench in the plans that inevitably happen, like, every day. And I like predictability. And so it was very hard for me, especially as a new vet. And I found myself a lot of times being defined by my reaction to a situation, or my need to take a breath, or to step outside, or, ask for help. And I didn't realize until much later that that was unfair, because who you are in a certain situation doesn't always define who you are as a person. And I feel like that is a very valuable lesson from going through all this together. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would completely agree, Katie. And you
Sure.
really kind of hit at a really good point there in terms of reaction to a situation versus a response to a situation. And part of the program, this cognitive behavioral therapy, is how you respond to, whether it be a great situation or a not so great situation, something that's not ideal. Really, you say your happiness and your freedom lies in how you respond to different situations. And so a lot of what we practice, and what's very applicable today in the practice, is how we, one, communicate with each other when there is a situation that's not perfect, or not, well, I should say not ideal.
Right, not ideal. I love that.
And having that, having a blurred out type judgy reaction, we really try to work through not doing that, and we try to have sort of the, let's process this, let's respond to this, let's recover from this, let's figure out what's happening. Asking how can I help versus what's going on. I mean, it's a very subtle difference in those comments, but and I would say one of our major, and this would be maybe one of those billboard quotes, is, and this is something we live by, and I think Alana and I probably talk about this every day, is being curious versus being judgmental. So if we can stay curious in a moment, if we can stay curious in a situation, and not judge people by maybe their worst part of their day or the worst part of their week, they are not to be that negative situation. we recognize everybody's humanity. But for example, probably something that everybody can remember in curbside. We're not doing curbside anymore, but you've got a client who's not super happy in the car, and you can kind of hear like there may be some kids in the background, or they're screaming, there's some crying, and this person's getting frustrated because the appointment's taking an hour and 15 minutes, whereas 2 years ago it took half an hour. But if we can sort of look at that situation and say, okay, let's say we've got a client out there, kids are crying, dog's got diarrhea, someone's got COVID, there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of fear. This is not about us. This is about whatever's happening in their life. Let's not put a label on them because they're having a moment. Let's help them through this moment and ask those curious questions and solve some problems that way. So I think that's been, sort of reframing some of those discussions, reframing some of the ways that we approach different, cases, people, each other. That reframing's been so key, and I think that's been one of the lessons that we've learned and really carried forward from Helen's trainings.
I love all of that, and I was just thinking as you were talking about that of a lot of the posts I've seen recently on social media, which unfortunately sometimes I feel like you're right. The veterinary profession is really good at empathy and compassion for our patients, for sure. Sometimes we're not as good about doing about those things when it comes to the clients that come with the patients. And I don't think there's one of us that doesn't care about every animal we've ever touched, but the people that come with them sometimes make it a little harder to love them. And and especially if we're not in the best frame of mind that day. But I really love that you were talking about how the cognitive behavioral therapy techniques and training and sessions that you've had with Helen and work that you've done with each other has also helped you reframe how clients might be acting and respond differently to that, because there's such a big element of that now, especially after the last 2 years, that clients have been going through more than they ever have. And just like all of us, and that us versus them mindset just seems to be getting more pronounced, it seems like, in a lot of the veterinary forums that I've been on, and we're not going to get anywhere that way. So
no, I mean, that was actually one of the initiating concepts to bring Helen in, and I think that's exactly what we called it. Was, look, we can't have an us versus them. Like, I mean, sometimes you feel like you're in this bunker, like the clinic is just this bunker. We're in an older building, there's not a ton of windows, and you're like, we were doing this
is where it all goes down.
and it's like, what's happening in the depths of that veterinary clinic, but you could really see that sort of, where we were really wanting to speak about our inclusion in the community. You could see the us versus them, and I'm like, all right, we got to get in front of this, because this is an us thing. We need to bring everybody in and make everybody part of this. And I really think that the program has helped us do that. But that's exactly how we framed it to the team during one of our meetings. Hey, we gotta change that narrative a little bit.
Yeah. Alana, have you noticed from your perspective that those attitudes have changed since you started this work? The attitudes toward clients and being able to empathize with them a little bit more?
Yeah, it's gone from, oh God, this so-and-so, I have to, deal with so-and-so to,
it's an opportunity.
I get to deal with so-and-so, you know what I mean? I'm just going to make the best of it. Yeah, it's opportunity to exceed their expectations and do it with a great attitude. So yeah, it definitely has, for sure. Yeah, everybody has embraced it completely, and we all speak the same language, right? So we all know what the other person's going through at that time, and we just
Ross Palmer, Dr. Palmer, who was on the podcast earlier this year, had talked about how he now views client interactions where he realizes the client was not reading him the way that he wanted them to, and that maybe they had some perceptions about who he was or what he could offer them. And it could be because of something he didn't say or something that they came in expecting. But he said he now views it as an opportunity to show them what he can do for them and how much he does want to help them. And I loved that because it's like a little challenge. And what veterinary professional doesn't love a challenge, right? Like, well,
right.
You think I don't care? I'll show you how much I care, and it's,
Yeah.
it's completely different from, well, get the heck out of my waiting room then if you don't think I care. So
Yeah.
Love
Yeah,
that.
well, and those I listened to the episode. Dr. Palmer at Colorado State, is that
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, and I felt for him, like that when he was having that mismatch with that client, like it got him in his heart,
Yeah.
And but interesting story from him and how he well, one, he's not going to define himself, right, as his he might reflect on that as one of his worst moments when this client challenged him that way, but he turned that into an opportunity, right? I mean, he talks about it and he teaches others, and but yeah, that's a great example of reframing how we look at what's happened to us.
Yeah, sometimes easier said than done, but that's why you have each other, right?
Exactly. You gotta have each other's backs. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was wondering, we were talking a little bit about how you all did get really lucky, of course, in finding Helen and in having her be so wonderful and so willing to help you, and and she donates proceeds to a dachshund rescue, and I mean, she's just like a super gem of a human. But also, I was wondering if you feel like this is a program that almost any practice could do, even if it's not with Helen or it's not in exactly the same way. Like, do you think that bringing a therapist in to work with the team and taking some of those lessons and continuing on in work with them or with each other, do you feel like that's something that's repeatable for pretty much anyone?
I do think it's repeatable. Now, I think each team is going to be different. Each team is going to have different needs. But I do feel like the whole veterinary, let's call it the ecosystem, is super open and receptive to recognizing now that we have a work-life balance problem in this industry. And so that level of openness and receptivity to these kinds of ideas is there. And as long as that's there, I think that these kinds of programs can definitely work. But that is one of the biggest questions, right? So we're trying to share this story. Like, the reason I reached out was, like, I want to put this out there in the universe. Like, I want to put this out there in the world. It was very helpful here. Can it be helpful in other places? And I honestly have to believe that it is. And I feel like when you're looking at all the different emails and stories that focus on mental health right now and focus on well-being in the veterinary profession, there's little bits and pieces, there's little gems out there where you, like, such and such practice in Wilmington, North Carolina, they've got a veterinary social worker they've brought on. AVMA has wellness resources that maybe not a lot of people or practices know about, but they've got a great program with some good training. AHA has some tremendous resources on bringing wellness and well-being practice into a business. So these little bits and pieces are out there, and we just need to figure out a way where we can get people to, again, past the contemplation phase. And so does it have to be as extreme? And I actually don't even want to use that word extreme, of bringing a therapist in. I would encourage everybody to truly think about it, but then also pick up the phone and ask some questions. And maybe it's a therapist, maybe it's a social worker, maybe it's a resource at AHA or AVMA. maybe it's looking at every webinar you could possibly find on on well-being. There's a lot of those out there right now.
Yeah.
But one of the things I would say that when I look at a lot of the different webinars and 1 hour kind of training things for leadership, they talk about it, but they don't have a lot of action steps like at the end of these webinars. And so those action steps really need to fall on you. And, you know, this doesn't even necessarily have to originate from a veterinarian or a practice manager or an operations manager. If there's somebody in your practice who is jazzed up by, let's bring some of this stuff into the practice, challenge them, encourage them, engage them to be that person that brings it in. Now, you know, be part of it, because you've got to, you know, bring this in systemically. But there are some really easy steps. And I think the other message is you don't need to like put together an entire cognitive behavioral therapy program in the beginning. Like, you know, maybe something that you kind of wade into with one or two things. And you ask for some help because, you know, I go through like the imposter syndrome. Like, I'm like, why am I talking about this? Who am I to talk about this? I'm a veterinarian, right? But, you know, if I'm not trying to prescribe, you know, therapy, I'm just keeping the conversation going. And then we're all kind of working together and practicing all of this together. But don't feel like you have to, like, we're going to bring cognitive behavioral therapy in, and you guys, we're going to do this. That's not going to probably like take off. That's going to like probably hit the floor and then like
a ton of bricks.
Maybe be exciting for like 2 weeks, but it's going to thud. And so you know, baby steps, little steps, work your way into it. But I think getting past contemplation, it is helpful to bring somebody in who does this stuff as a career. And you know, with Helen, I honestly can't even give you an idea about the cost of this, because Helen's like amazing and she did all of this stuff just to become part of our team and to help our team, because she saw what the veterinary industry is, the situation that we're all in. One thing I would say though, if you, in terms of cost, in a way to kind of reframe the expense, is one, you're gonna change someone's life. I guarantee it. You might even save someone's life, right? I mean, who knows what's happening in the minds of everybody on our team. But if this were something that actually saved a life, you may not ever know it, but feel confident that you might actually save someone's life. But the retention of the team, and then the development of the team, what you get in terms of the social connection, like, it's amazing. I love my team. Like, I love my team, and I'm very happy to say that. We had like a great meeting yesterday, and you know, all the dopamine was way up here, and it was awesome. But you're gonna feel a connection to people that will make your life better. Like, so, and this is all. I'm all saying this to like move people to action. But the other part is like, one, retaining your team. You know, we've got this shortage of people. We're having a lot of issues in the veterinary world with, you know, just having enough team members to get through the day. You're going to retain your people, because what this says is, one, you really care, like you really truly care.
Yeah. And
that's going to be communicated. And one, you're going to show a little vulnerability, and you're going to be leading from the middle. And that is a team you want to be a part of. The other thing is recruitment. So we've actually used this concept in our recruiting. When I put an ad out there for a veterinarian, I don't put on there all the bells and whistles. We start our ad with grit plus love. And we've hired 3 veterinarians in the last 6 months.
I just heard like all of the veterinarians, the practice owners listening to this who are trying to hire vets, I just heard them all collectively fall out of their chairs.
I
like, where did they come from?
we put grit plus love. It was, you know, this is what we are working on. We are working on developing our team. We are working on focusing on ourselves so that we can do all the great veterinary work that we do. And that great veterinary work, it falls into place because we are happier and we are doing what we love.
Yeah.
And so retention, recruitment, and just recovery and resiliency. I mean, these are things that we all need. And honestly, we went to vet school. We went to tech school. We didn't go to school to be, cognitive behavioral therapists. So get some help, and I guess so reframe the cost of bringing someone in into let's retain, let's engage, let's recruit. I can tell you that on our local level, we're kind of remote. We're an hour and a half away from the closest emergency clinic. We're on the Oregon coast, which is beautiful, but we're a smaller community. We're not downtown Portland where, recruitment might be a little bit easier. But we've pulled people to the coast to come check out the practice. And I just feel like this is something that's paying off for us in so many different ways that it truly is almost like a priceless deal. So invest in such a
I'm like ready to go invest right now. I don't even have a practice. That was very effective.
So I just think I think it can work. And and one of the big questions for me, and this came up with Sonia Olson, who I know I think you've had on your program, and her as a person who is intimately connected to well-being and creating resiliency within the veterinary world. But we've talked about, like, how do we get people to act on this stuff? And one of the things that we've talked about is what happens if you don't act? What's the price of inaction? And I think the price of inaction is we just stay on the record player and we circle right back to where we are with all of the different emotional baggage or lack of coping, whatever we want to call it, that well-being balance. But if we don't act on ideas like this, we're going to just find ourselves playing the same song over and over and over. And we really think we've established in the last year or two that there needs to be some change in the industry, right? I mean, we need to do different things. And maybe this isn't the program, but it's definitely worked on the local level.
Yeah, I mean, and I think there's such a big tendency in our industry and in every industry to think, what is the answer, right? What's the answer to the veterinarian and tech shortage, or at least perceived shortage? What is the answer to burnout? What is the answer to us not being able to, to keep teams happy and healthy and watching, people leave the field? And there isn't just one solution. There have to be so many, because people have to try something on and see how it fits, or for what works great for one team won't work for another, or they're not ready for it. Like, I can picture, Ilana, you clearly loved working at Grove before any of this started, right? Like, I can tell that you had that love for the team and the practice already, and for Charles as a boss, but you, that time during 2020 would have tried any team, no matter how cohesive they were at the beginning. And so I'm sure that culture helped you to implement this program so effectively. Like, Ilana, you mentioned it was voluntary, and I think maybe Charles didn't mention that at the beginning, that the participation in these sessions was voluntary, and you had 100% participation. And I just think that, like, that just blew my mind when I read that in your email, because I don't know any team, including really, really healthy teams, where everybody would have been like, yeah, I'm going to go to this this session where we talk about feelings, like, it's just, so I just, I think that's.
Well, it was mentioned we weren't going to be doing Kumbaya. So, I mean, I remember the first time it was brought up, and I was like, oh, okay, all right. So then we, Charles kind of, I mean, but he, he made it seem it was okay. The way that Charles came across it, to us was just that it was going to be okay. We didn't have to do it, but it was going to help us.
Amazing. You also mentioned, Alana, earlier that you're fear-free certified now, which I love because you had started off being so
Yeah.
nervous around dogs. And I was just thinking about all of the money. I'm fear-free certified too. I love fear-free. But I'm just thinking about all the money and resources that teams spend to train, their people to be fear free, and they'll paint the walls a different color, and they'll order different color lab coats, and they'll buy a towel heater, and they'll spray Feel Away everywhere. Feel Away's expensive, man, and like.
Yeah.
It's so much money and effort, and it's all completely worth it, in my opinion. Like, that is so worth it. But what are we doing to make our practices fear free for our people? We are not spending that money, and we're not committing that time and
Right.
those resources because we feel like we don't have it. But if we can do it for our patients, we can do it for ourselves, and we have to. Otherwise, what good is it? If only half the people in that room are feeling comfortable.
Right.
So, yeah, I love everything that you just said, Charles, and I hope you inspire somebody listening to go out and at least take the first step past contemplation, to think what would be realistic for my practice.
Yeah. And the other thing that I've kind of tried to talk about too is, when we are trying something new on like this, that does feel so different. A lot of times you'll hear people kind of blow it off as, oh, this is just soft stuff, like this is whatever. Well, the reason we don't do it is because it's hard stuff, right? I mean, we're not maybe geared to talk about how we might be feeling or having this conversation. And it's actually for a lot of people, very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'll say is, this has to be a new habit. It has to be a habit forming kind of thing. But embrace the discomfort that comes with a new habit. Like we all can, like one of the most relatable things is, gosh, I haven't been on a run for a long time, and I'm going to go for a run, and oh my gosh, it hurts. And then you gotta work through that, and you have to, establish this new routine of getting back in shape, or whether it be any kind of exercise. It's the same kind of thing, and you're going to feel a little bit uncomfortable potentially bringing something like this up because it's not your normal conversation. But embrace that discomfort. Like if you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable, you might actually be doing you're wading into a space that's not your comfort zone, and getting out of that comfort zone to do something like this, which is only bringing positivity and happiness and health. It's okay to feel uncomfortable. You just got to work through it. And for sure, I would say in the practice, like the news, I mean, we were pretty jazzed up and it was pretty fun. I mean, I remember, after the first several sessions, we were all ready to start, let's incorporate this, let's do this, and so we were all pretty jazzed up by it. But there were moments like, oh, okay, how am I gonna deal with this situation, or coming out to a problem, or just bringing the issues up and keeping the conversation alive. Sometimes it is a little uncomfortable, but
Yeah.
it's definitely worth it to stick with it.
Yeah. It sounds 100% true, and your team is the proof. And I know a lot of people feel like maybe they've lost a little bit of that team cohesiveness during the pandemic. I know our team did, in the practice I was in, just because it was a big team and we weren't all together,
Right.
It was skeleton crew for a while and working in teams to avoid, cross exposure, and at two different hospitals, and we didn't have team meetings anymore and for a while, and it's so hard. And so it seems like what you're talking about, the techniques that you learned. So for instance, assigning new meaning to the words, like, okay, just breathe, like you said, Alana, those things could be implemented even in a team where maybe they weren't ready to attack some voluntary longer modules with some more deep work. Maybe that comes later. And I was going to ask you at the end, but are there resources that you can share that you think would be helpful, or do you have resources, for your team that you would be willing to share that offer a little bit of help with those techniques, even if people can't bring somebody in at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There are a lot of, like, say we wanted to go with something like cognitive behavioral therapy. Um, there's a lot of resources out there, and there's some very simplified resources. You can find these online that are like card decks that, you can kind of draw the card, and it talks about different techniques that you can apply to help cope.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, like, specific authors. I would say there's a couple resources that I feel very fortunate to have encountered that kind of helped frame some of this stuff for me. And I can mention a couple books that I've read.
Mm-hmm.
Brene Brown,
Oh, yeah.
obviously she's like amazing, and she's got a new HBO Max special going right now. But anyway, her book Dare to Lead, um, it's like amazing. Like, if you need something to help ground you into how to think about leadership or how to think about teams and how teams work, Dare to Lead is an amazing book. It's on audio, but I'm not Brene Brown's, like, I'm not a
No,
salesperson for her,
I'm trying to decide
but
if it's actually on the shelf behind me. It might
uh,
be, because those are all my favorite books back there. But I'm
yeah.
so with you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's on my nightstand, and I also listen to the audiobook. But her stuff is great. So if anybody needs a starter for, like, getting inspired to, like, if this doesn't work, this podcast, and you need somebody else to, like, move you to action, Brene
Yeah.
Brown, Brene Brown, Brene Brown. And then Johann
Alana's
Har.
laughing. She's heard this before.
Is she, well, I
He
gave her.
gave me the book.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and then Johann Hari, Hari is the last name. He has a book called Lost Connections, which
Mm.
really kind of helps to frame, like, how important connection is. Um, I don't even know how this book fell into my lap. I wish I could tell you, but I can't. Um, but in terms of, like, societal uh, disconnection, what the pandemic has done in terms of separating people, and talking about loneliness, and just the detrimental aspects of loneliness. So Johann Hari, great book, great read on really communicating the importance of connection. And then there's another book called Compassionomics. I do not have the author,
I love the
but this
title.
is, but yeah, and
Good
these are a
title.
couple MDs who scienced up the idea of compassion and empathy in medicine. And there is a full circle concept here. So basically, they're talking about how when we apply empathy and compassion, we actually get a feedback loop that makes us feel better, happier, and more grounded. Um, Caregivers high, that kind of thing. But it's another push to, like, really think about how we are applying empathy and compassion in veterinary medicine. I got that book from a Freakonomics podcast. So, but those are three books that really kind of set me in motion, in terms of our culture development and movement to action. So in terms of specific resources, I would say look at those kinds of things that help us build culture in our practices first, and then move into some of these ideas that help really solidify the culture and then make the team even more healthy.
Yeah, I love to hear that that those words of wisdom from you, because I can imagine in some of the cultures that I've seen where if one team member said to the other one, okay, just try some box breathing, it wouldn't go well. It would not be
That's
well
right.
received. So culture
Right.
always is important, and maybe that's where we start, because even just to focus on that shows that you care and that you want to help the team, and that authenticity about wanting to help the people you work with live better and work better together is a huge step in the right direction. So Alana, I'm sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm gonna close out here, and I was wondering if you had words of wisdom, that question that I put on the outline. Do you have any words of wisdom for a person who's not in a quote unquote leadership role in the practice, but who really wants to start talking about this in the practice? They're a little nervous to bring it up. Do you have any words for how that person might go about doing that, and not feel, such a big fear of failure?
I mean, one of the things they could do is play this podcast.
That's true. I mean, Charles made a really good case just now.
He did make a good case.
I like that answer. Yeah, everybody should go play the podcast. But and the transcript will be available. So if somebody doesn't like to listen to podcasts, you can just download the transcript and take chunks out of it. And I'm really serious about that. Like, some people need to know that this is evidence-based too. And I love that you recommended a book where MDs actually took the idea of compassion and empathy and integrated it into what most practice managers and practice owners need to know, which is, is this really going to affect how we do our jobs? Is it going to make us better at what we do? Can we see results from it that we can measure? And that could go a long way with some people, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm all feelings all the time, so I'm just like, yeah, absolutely, we should talk about empathy. But I've never been in charge of a practice, so. But yeah, so Alana, you're right. I mean, giving them tools for that conversation would really help. What about, if you know that the person you're talking to is maybe not used to getting feedback from the team, is there a way that you feel like they could approach that? Like, would you recommend having them go up to their manager or practice owner in person, or send them a message? Like, I'm just thinking about so many people I've known who have such great ideas and they've just been afraid to speak up.
Oh, that's just such a shame. I guess, I mean, that's really a hard one for me because I've never...
You're clearly not that person.
Of course. And well, in the past, I have had, bosses, I guess, that weren't so approachable. But, the last 9 years I've had Charles, and he's anything but, I mean, not approachable. I mean, he's so approachable. There's no way that you couldn't. And every single staff meeting, every little debriefing or anything, he always announces, if you need to talk, if you have, want to give me feedback, if you, anything, we are here for you. And please come and approach me, if you're uncomfortable. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I haven't had a boss like that I couldn't approach in a long time. You know what I mean? But I feel like I would, I mean, if you're more comfortable with a coworker, maybe have yourself and a coworker who kind of have the same ideas, get together and then maybe bring it to somebody, obviously not in the attacking, you know what I mean? Don't attack the person that you want to talk, your boss or anything like that, but bring it to them in a way that, hey, this is what I learned. I'm wondering what do you think? Yeah. What do you think about this being brought into our practice? Could we do this? Could we give it a whirl? Like, reach out, Yeah. I guess I've just been very lucky. My whole team is.
You never know till you try too, right? I mean, people can surprise you, and I love the way you phrased that, where you said, what do you think about this? So you're not waiting, and also the right moment is important. Like, not running up to the person in the middle of the treatment area on a Saturday morning is probably like a good idea. I probably would avoid doing that. But a quiet moment where you're not overly emotional seems like it would be a good time to talk about it.
I mean, ask them for feedback, right?
Yeah.
Ask them.
Yeah.
Can I provide you with some feedback? That's something else we also learned in communications, which worked great with the team. Yeah. And then they're expecting that, They're not just caught off guard and feeling pounced upon,
Yeah, that's great advice.
Pick your time.
Pick your time and take the risk, because you never know. Yeah.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I think we also talk about in the clinic too is that we frame communication as an act of compassion, right? And if you really kind of think about when we are communicating, if you think about communication as compassion, it's going to lead to action. And so if you feel like really deeply like, hey, this conversation needs to be had because it's going to impact the team in a positive way, let's put it out there. I'm going to be compassionate and act in this on this. Let's take this and have a conversation. So if you frame it that way, I think a lot of times too, you're going to think, I have to do this. I have to bring this up. I have to start this conversation because it's an act of compassion.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. There's somebody listening right now who's feeling like they have to do it. And I hope they'll go out and do it after listening to the two of you. Because I feel optimistic about the profession and about how our teams can weather all the tough challenges that have been thrown at them and are still being thrown at them. I feel more optimistic about that after having talked to both of you. So
well, thanks.
Thank you for that.
And I appreciate that. I mean, I think, applying some optimism is part of this whole thing. And I'm glad that you are taking that away, but I will throw that back at you and say that when I listen to Central Line and listen to you guys talking with your awesome guests, I come away optimistic. Like it jazzes me up. So, it goes both ways.
Yeah, that means so much because that's what I hope for with every conversation because our guests have so much to offer. And I wish I could talk to each of them for 3 hours because I feel like we're just barely skimming the surface. But but there are so many people in our field who are working hard for change, and you all are some of them. And I love that. So I'm so glad that you reached out and we connected. And I know we're going to be crossing paths again in the future because I feel like this is all too good and too fortuitous that this is going to be it. So I'm sure we'll be talking again. So
for sure. I hope so.
Yeah. And in case you're listening or watching and you missed it, Charles and his team were on a Newstat story too that our reporter Tony McReynolds, our Newstat editor and reporter, wrote about just recently. So we'll link to that story in the show notes for this episode too. And please, if you want to get in touch with Charles and his team, send me an email at podcast@aha.org, and we can see if we can get you in touch or connect you with some of the resources that we talked about today. So
yeah, and I would definitely say I invite any kind of questions, any kind of additional information. I'm very happy to share because I think this is how it all changes, is we put it out there. So if your next action is writing an email to Katie, make that your next action. It's an easy baby step, and then we can help you with the next steps through some conversation. So I totally invite anybody to reach out because I love talking about this. I love sharing it, and I'd love this to have a life beyond what we're doing here. So. But thank you for having us.
Pretty sure you've made that happen. And Alana is wearing, if you're listening and not watching, and I can't tell if they'll be able to see on the video, but Alana's wearing a hat that says Grit Plus Love and Grove Vet Clinic. And so they have swag. So any good initiative, right? If you want it to catch on and have a life bigger than its own, it needs swag. So
it does need
if
swag.
There's nothing else, you can, if you do an initiative at your hospital and you launch it with some swag, like I want to see that too, because I'm a huge fan of the swag. So I feel like that just helps everything just take on a little bit more energy and love. So
well, maybe we should, we'll have to get your address, Katie, and we'll get you a little swag.
Oh my God, I would be so excited. Everyone's going to be so jealous. All right, well, we'll exchange swag then, because you have some Frankie stickers coming.
Right.
Well, Alana and Charles, thank you so much for joining me and for everything you're doing for each other, for your clients, for the profession, because it really is for the profession now. And I want you to remember that on the hard days, that you're helping a lot more than just the people you see in the room with you. So,
thank you so much for having us.
All right. Thanks you all for listening. And we'll catch you next time on Central Line.